This is the Chinese origin story of Pangu and the egg of the world, and I got it from Khan Academy, and my sources were David and Margaret Leeming. In the beginning was a huge egg containing chaos, a mixture of yin and yang, female, male, aggressive, passive, cold, hot, dark, light, and wet, dry. Within this yin and yang was Pangu, who broke forth from the egg as the giant who separated chaos into the many opposites, including earth and sky. Pangu stood in the middle, his head touching the sky, his feet planted on earth. The heavens and the earth began to grow at a rate of 10 feet a day, and Pangu grew along with them. After another 18,000 years, the sky was higher and earth was thicker. Pangu stood between them like a pillar, 30,000 miles in height, so they would never join again. When Pangu died, his skull became the top of the sky. His breath became the wind and clouds. His voice, the rolling thunder. One eye became the sun, and the other the moon. His body and limbs turned into 5 big mountains, and his blood formed the roaring waters. His veins became roads, and his muscles turned to fertile land. The innumerable stars in the sky came from his hair and beard, and flowers and trees from his skin. His marrow turned to jade and pearls. His sweat flowed like the good rain and the sweet dew that nurtures all things on earth. Some people say that the fleas and the lice on his body became the ancestors of humanity. But as Pangu died, the world began.
You can find this Cherokee myth along with many more in James Mooney's book, Myths of the Cherokee. The earth is a great floating island in a sea of water. At each of the 4 corners there is a cord hanging down from the sky. The sky is of solid rock. When the world grows old and worn out, the cords will break and the earth will sink down into the ocean. Everything will be water again. All the people will be dead. The Indians are very afraid of this. In the long time ago, when everything was all water, all the animals lived up in Galun Lati, beyond the stone arc that made the sky. But it was very much crowded. All the animals wanted more room. The animals began to wonder what was below the water, and at last, Beaver's grandchild, Little Water Beetle, offered to go and find out. Water Beetle darted in every direction over the surface of the water, but it could find no place to rest. There was no land at all. Then Water Beetle dived to the bottom of the water and brought up some soft mud. This began to grow and spread out on every side until it became the island which we call the earth. Afterwards, this earth was fastened to the sky with 4 cords, but no one remembers who did this. At first, the earth was flat and soft and wet. The animals were anxious to get down, and they sent out different birds to see if it was yet dry. But there was no place to alight, so the birds came back to Galun Lati. Then at last it seemed to be time again, so they sent out Buzzard. They told him to go and make ready for them. This was the great Buzzard, the father of all buzzards we see now. He flew all over the earth, low down near the ground, and it was still soft. When he reached the Cherokee country, he was very tired. His wings began to flap and strike the ground. Wherever they struck the earth, there was a valley. Whenever the wings turned upwards again, there was a mountain. When the animals above saw this, they were afraid that the whole world would be mountains. So they called him back, but the Cherokee country remains full of mountains to this day. When the earth was dry and the animals came down, it was still dark. Therefore they got the sun and they set it in track to go every day across the island from east to west, just overhead. It was too hot this way. Red Crawfish had his shell scorched a bright red so that his meat was spoiled. Therefore the Cherokee do not eat it. Then the medicine men raised the sun a hand's breadth in the air, but it was still too hot. They raised it another time, and then another time. At last they had raised it 7 handbreadths, so that it was just under the sky arc. Then it was right, and they left it so. That is why the medicine men called the high place the 7th height. Every day the sun goes along under this arc on the underside. It returns at night on the upper side of the arc to its starting place. There is another world under this earth. It is like this one in every way. The animals, the plants, and the people are the same. But the seasons are different. The streams that come down from the mountains are the trails by which we reach this underworld. The springs at their head are the doorways by which we enter it. But in order to enter the world, one must fast and then go to the water, and have one of the underground people for a guide. We know that the seasons in the underground world are different, because the water in the spring is always warmer in winter than the air in this world, and in summer the water is cooler. We do not know who made the first plants and animals, but when they were first made, they were told to watch and keep awake for 7 nights. This is the way young men do when they fast and pray to their medicine. They tried to do this. The first night, nearly all animals stayed awake. The next night, several of them dropped off to sleep. The third night, still more went to sleep. At last, on the 7th night, only the owl, the panther, and 1 or 2 more were still awake. Therefore, to these were given the power to see in the dark, to go about as if it were day, and to kill and eat the birds and animals which must sleep during the night. Even some of the trees went to sleep. Only the cedar, the pine, the spruce, the holly, and the laurel were awake all 7 nights. Therefore they are always green. They are also sacred trees. But to the other trees it was said, because you did not stay awake, therefore you shall lose your hair every winter. Men came after the animals and plants. At first there were only a brother and sister, until he struck her with a fish and told her to multiply. And so it was. In 7 days a child was born to her, and thereafter every 7 days another. And they increased very fast until there was danger that the world could not keep them. Then it was made that a woman should have only 1 child in a year, and it has been so even to this day.
This creation story is from The Origin of Life and Death, African Creation Myths by Yuli Bear. Before there was any life on earth, God made a man and named him Moon. He sent Moon to live on the bottom of the sea, but Moon wanted to live on land. Despite God's warnings of how hard life would be, Moon went and lived on land. Eventually, the lifelessness of the land made Moon so unhappy and he wept. God took pity on Moon and sent him a wife named Morningstar to keep him company for 2 years. When Morningstar came from heaven to live with Moon, she brought fire with her, and it had never existed before. She built a fire in the middle of Moon's hut and slept on the opposite side. In the night, however, he crossed over and made love to her. By the next morning, she was swollen and had given birth to the grasses and trees and other plants. And soon the world was green with life. The trees grew until they touched the sky, and then the first rain fell from the clouds that they touched. Thus life on land flourished, and Moon and Morningstar led a bountiful life in their new paradise. At the end of 2 years, Morningstar returned to the heavens to live there forever. Again, Moon wept in his loneliness. God offered him another wife, but he warned Moon that this time the husband would die after 2 years. Thus, Evening Star came to live with Moon. When they first made love, she gave birth to goats and sheep and cows on the next day. On the day after, she gave birth to the antelopes and birds. On the 3rd day, boys and girls were born. Moon wanted to sleep again with Evening Star, but God warned him that he should not. He did so, however, and on the next day, Evening Star gave birth to lions, leopards, snakes, and scorpions to plague the humankind because Moon ignored the warning. As Moon's daughters grew up, they became beautiful, and he wanted to sleep with them too. He did so, and they had many children. Thus Moon came to the rule over of a far-flung kingdom of his descendants. Evening Star was jealous, however, and she sent a snake to bite her unfaithful husband. He soon fell ill, and the rainfall that his people had enjoyed stopped. As the rivers dried up and the flame began, his people concluded that it was his fault. Eventually they rose up and startled them, and they set another man as the place of their king. The people threw Moon's body in the ocean, but he rose from the sea to the skies to seek his first wife, Morningstar, in hopes of relieving their life in the paradise that they made.